January 23rd, 1943. Eglin Field Proving Ground, Florida. The morning sun rose pale and indifferent over a landscape rimed with frost. The thermometer read 14 degrees Fahrenheit, a cruel absurdity for the Gulf Coast. And yet the cold felt deeper than numbers could describe. It was the cold of failure, of lives suspended above Europe, waiting for weapons that would not fire. On the test range, a line of Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns steamed faintly in the frigid air, their barrels glowing like exhausted iron lungs. One after another, they had jammed, each test ending in the same metallic death rattle. A bolt seized, a round frozen half-fed, a mechanism paralyzed by its own perfection. Major Robert Johnson, Army Air Force's Armament Division, stood over the wreckage of data sheets and thermometers, his jaw set against the wind. 17 failures in 2 hours, he muttered. Unacceptable. Around him, engineers scribbled notes with trembling hands. The weapon that armed every American bomber, 13 per flying fortress, 5,000 guns over the English skies, had betrayed them all above 20,000 feet. Up there, at -30 Fahrenheit, metal shrank, lubricant congealed, and brave men died behind silent guns. Beside the test stand, a grey-haired civilian crouched with the patience of a craftsman and the silence of someone who saw machines not as diagrams, but as living things. His name was Samuel Green, 52 years old, toolmaker from Hartford, Connecticut. No uniform, no degree. Only a machinist's intuition honed across 37 years of quiet labor. He ran his fingers along the frozen receiver, feeling its pulse, or lack of one, and took out a small, oil-stained notebook. While officers debated charts and specifications, Green wrote a single line. "The problem is not the gun. The problem is that we keep trying to make the gun work as we think it should, instead of letting it show us how it wants to work." Johnson heard him and turned, eyebrows lifting in disbelief. "Mr. Green, that's poetic, but physics doesn't take suggestions."
Temperature reading is still holding.
Green looked up, meeting the officer's irritation with quiet conviction. "Neither does steel, Major," he said. "It simply tells you the truth. You only have to listen." No one yet understood that this conversation, between a soldier of command and a man of instinct, would soon alter the course of aerial warfare. Before the spring thawed Florida's sand, the most stubborn weapon in the US arsenal would be reborn through a file, a thought, and a stubborn belief that even perfection could be improved. Samuel Green had never worn wings or held rank, yet his hands carried the quiet authority of a man who had built tools for others to dream with. At Pratt & Whitney, he shaped steel to tolerances thinner than a human hair. Gauges, dies, fixtures, the unseen skeleton of American industry. But the war had changed everything. Machines no longer merely built engines. They decided who lived to see another dawn over Europe. That winter, when Pratt & Whitney began producing Browning machine guns under government contract, the problem arrived like a contagion. Every weapon tested in the plant failed in cold. Engineers swore the design was flawless. "It's not the gun," they said, "it's the environment." To them, perfection existed on paper. To Green, perfection that did not function was failure disguised as pride. He began working alone after shifts, taking a single jammed M2 apart in the dim light of his basement. No assistants, no instruments beyond calipers, files, and his intuition. Piece by piece, he measured, weighed, inspected, and found nothing wrong. Every surface gleamed within specification, every tolerance exactly as the drawings decreed. And yet the gun failed. Then came a sound, the faintest scrape of steel against steel, as he pushed the bolt carrier through its channel. It hesitated, ever so slightly. He did it again. The same invisible resistance, a whisper of friction where mathematics insisted none should exist. He leaned close, eyes narrowing as though reading a secret between the lines of metal. The channel, though flawless to the naked eye, was not perfectly straight. A bend so small it defied rulers, 20,000ths of an inch across 12 inches of length. The weapon, according to every document, was perfect. And that, Green realized, was the problem. In the cold, when metal contracted and oil thickened, that infinitesimal flaw became fatal. The machine did not fail because it was imperfect. It failed because men had refused to allow it to be imperfect. That night, Green did the unthinkable. He clamped the bolt carrier in his vise, picked up a precision file, and began to remove material, 30,000ths of an inch. It was heresy. He was deliberately taking the weapon out of tolerance. By every regulation of ordnance engineering, he was damaging government property. But when he reassembled the weapon, something felt different. The bolt glided through its channel like breath through a lung. No hesitation, no scrape, just smooth, mechanical certainty. At dawn, he carried the modified gun to the test range. The officers laughed behind their clipboards. The civilian with his hand filed blasphemy. Then Green loaded the belt. 100 rounds, 200, 500, not a single jam. Smoke drifted across the field, and in the silence that followed, even the wind seemed to wait. Major Johnson lowered his binoculars slowly, his voice caught between disbelief and awe. "You altered the weapon's dimensions?" "Yes, sir," Green said calmly. "You damaged a government firearm." "I made it work." News of the Hartford fix spread through the plant like a whispered scandal. A civilian machinist had tampered with government ordnance and somehow made it work. To some, it was genius. To others, blasphemy. Within days, Green was summoned to the manager's office. A cramped room, thick with smoke and accusation. Captain Robert Mitchell, the Army liaison overseeing production, stood waiting with folded arms and the practiced glare of authority. "Mr. Green," he began, "I'm told you altered the receiver dimensions of an M2 machine gun without authorization. Do you realize the severity of that?" Green nodded once. "Yes, sir.
Temperature reading is still holding.
You could be charged under the War Production Act. You could go to prison." Green's voice remained even, quiet but immovable. "You can court-martial me if the weapon fails." The room froze. The plant manager, torn between duty and admiration, intervened softly. "Captain, perhaps we should test it again. If it works, we'll have our answer." Mitchell exhaled through his nose, his pride and caution locked in combat. At last he said, "Very well, send it to Eglin Field. Let the Army decide." Eglin Field, Florida, January 23rd, 1943. The same field where Green had first watched the guns freeze.
Chamber stabilized.
Major Robert Johnson remembered the man from that bitter morning.
Rolling mechanism engaged.
Now the weapon before him, serial number 44103, carried a new mark, etched into its frame, modified by S. Green. Johnson had not wanted to waste a day on this, but desperation, he had learned, was the midwife of miracles. The test began in the cold chamber, -50 Fahrenheit. For 12 hours, the weapon lay dormant in its coffin of ice. Then, at dawn, technicians wheeled it into the firing pit. "Chamber temperature?" Johnson asked. "-50, sir." "Proceed." Green stood behind the barrier, hands clasped behind his back, eyes unblinking. The gunner pulled the trigger. The first burst shattered the morning like thunder. 50 rounds, 100, 2,000. The gun never faltered. They buried it in sand and dust, chilled it again, fouled it with mud. Still it fired, flawlessly, endlessly, like an iron heartbeat that refused to stop. By the time the last casing clinked to the ground, the test officer's hands were trembling. He looked at Green, the way a man might look at someone who had bent the laws of nature just enough to save his friends. Major Johnson stepped forward. "Mr. Green, what exactly did you do?" Green opened his notebook and drew a simple sketch. A rectangle, a bolt, 2 lines representing clearance. "I gave it room to breathe," he said. Johnson frowned. "That's not engineering." "No,"
Temperature reading
Green
is still
replied.
holding at -20.
"It's understanding."
We need to cycle them now.
3
before
days
the grease
later,
freezes solid.
Green was ordered to appear before an evaluation board. Johnson, 2 ordnance engineers from Aberdeen Proving Ground, and 2 representatives from Browning Arms. The room smelled of cold metal and suspicion. "You're telling us," one engineer said, "that by increasing tolerances, you improved reliability? Impossible. That contradicts the design's mathematical precision." Green looked at him kindly, as one might regard a young man certain of his own equations. "Sir, I've worked with machines for 37 years. Your mathematics say it shouldn't work, but the gun says otherwise. Maybe you should listen to it."
Chamber stabilized.
The room fell
Pressure
silent.
check complete.
Somewhere outside, a
Rolling
test
mechanism
gun rattled
engaged.
across the range,
Stand clear of the
each
blast
burst
zone.
echoing like a distant drumbeat of vindication. Major Johnson finally spoke. "Gentlemen, I don't care what the math says. This fix saves lives. We will test it on 20 guns and see if it holds." And with that, a revolution began. Not with a design meeting, not with a general's order, but with the file marks of a single craftsman who had dared to doubt perfection. February 1943. The war machine of the United States turned like a vast gear, and Samuel Green's idea, small enough to fit inside a machinist's notebook, began to spread through it like fire. 20 Browning M2s, drawn from 3 different factories, were selected for testing. Each weapon received Green's modification by his own hand. He moved from gun to gun with surgical calm, his file whispering over the steel, removing 3/1000ths of an inch, the distance between death and dependability. The tests began at dawn. Cold chambers, altitude simulations, sustained fire until barrels glowed white. The results were absolute. Unmodified guns, 68% failure. Green's guns, less than 1%. Statistical perfection in a world built on imperfection. The report crossed desks faster than telegrams could travel. General Henry Hap Arnold saw it first and underlined a sentence in red ink.
Temperature reading
Mr.
is
Green's
still holding at
modification
-20.
eliminates jamming under
We need
all
to cycle them
operational
now before the
conditions.
grease
Then he
freezes
wrote in the
solid.
margin, "Implement immediately." But the bureaucracy of war resists miracles. The Ordnance Department objected. Too costly, too radical, too unorthodox. $12 million, 18 months of work, they argued. Green stood before them in Washington, his calloused hands folded, his voice steady. "Gentlemen, you're measuring money. I'm measuring men. How many will you lose in 18 months?" The silence that followed was the sound of paper crumbling before reality. Within days, Lieutenant General William Knudsen, Director of War Production, flew to Eglin Field himself. He watched Green's
Chamber
weapon
stabilized.
fire in sub-zero
Pressure check
conditions,
complete.
flawless after
Rolling
2,000
mechanism
rounds.
engaged. Stand
Then he
clear
turned
of
to the
blast
machinist.
zone.
"Can this be done in the field?" "Yes, sir," Green replied. 45 minutes per gun. Any trained armorer can do it.
Adjustment
And in the factories? Just change the dimension. No new tools required.
Highlighted here.
Knudsen didn't hesitate. "Then do it. Every weapon, every line, every armory." They called it Modification 743 in the paperwork. But among the soldiers and gunners, it became simply Green's fix. Within 1 week, the order reached every production line in America. Within 2, the new specifications were carved into factory steel. Mobile modification teams crossed the Atlantic, carrying files and gauges, working through nights at English airfields to bring the old guns into the new age. By spring, 40,000 guns had been reborn. By summer, all 96,000. The results came not from laboratories, but from the skies. March 1943, 57% of bomber missions reported gun malfunctions. April, after partial modification, 38%. June, after full implementation, under 4. The numbers told one story, the pilots told another. Crewmen wrote letters from England, words smudged with oil and gratitude. Mr. Green, all 13 guns worked. We brought everyone home. He kept every letter in a wooden box in his basement, each one a heartbeat of metal and memory. German pilots noticed too. Intelligence intercepts recorded their astonishment. American bombers fire without pause now, one Luftwaffe report read. Their guns do not freeze. Attacks are no longer survivable. Across Europe and the Pacific, the change rippled outward. Tank commanders reported smoother fire from their vehicle-mounted 50s. Navy gunners found that even salt and humidity could not silence the weapon. The Browning, once temperamental, had become elemental, fire made reliable, a weapon that would serve not for years, but for generations. At a ceremony in April, General Arnold himself pinned the Medal for Merit on Green's lapel. The citation spoke of extraordinary achievement in weapons reliability, saving countless American lives. Green accepted it quietly, thanked the general, and went home. He placed the medal in a drawer beside his machinist's file and never displayed it again. He was a craftsman, not a hero. But history would disagree. The 50 caliber Browning, reborn by the intuition of one civilian, would remain in service for decades, through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Each burst of fire, each survival owed something to the man who listened to a gun until it spoke the truth. When the war finally ended, factories quieted, and the sky once filled with wings fell into peacetime silence. The Browning M2 remained, unaltered in spirit, unyielding in form. Soldiers dismantled it on dusty workbenches in Korea, reassembled it on tank turrets in Vietnam, and even into the new century its thunder could still be heard, the same rhythm, the same heart that Samuel Green had steadied in 1943. History books rarely spoke his name. There were no statues, no parades, no medals beyond that single one locked in a drawer. Yet for every airman who lived through the firestorm over Bremen, for every gunner who held the trigger and felt the weapon answer with steady fury instead of silence, Green was there, unseen, as essential as the steel itself. He retired quietly in 1951, his hands scarred by a lifetime of precision. The wooden box of letters remained in his basement, hundreds of them, written by men who owed their lives to a fraction of an inch. He never read them twice. To him, the miracle was not his file stroke. It was that the machine had revealed its secret, and he had been humble enough to listen. War, for all its destruction, has always been a teacher. It teaches nations the cost of arrogance, engineers the humility of error, and men the fragile edge between chaos and control. The Browning's transformation was not born from genius, but from doubt, the rarest form of courage in a world obsessed with certainty. Samuel Green had looked upon a weapon that the finest minds of the military-industrial world declared perfect, and whispered the heresy that perfection is an enemy of survival. He had understood what armies, corporations, and even civilizations often forget, that reliability is not born from flawlessness, but from forgiveness. Every machine, like every human being, must be allowed to fail a little in order to endure. And so the historian, standing half a century later before a museum display where an M2 sits beneath glass, sees more than a gun. He sees a philosophy engraved into metal, the faith that function matters more than pride. He sees the ghost of a man in a basement workshop, the rasp of a file across cold steel, and the quiet murmur of an insight that outlived its maker. War remembers its generals and its victories, but peace endures because of its craftsmen. And in that vast ledger of human conflict, among the great and terrible inventions that defined an age, there remains one small entry, written not in glory, but in the measured rhythm of a machinist's hand. Samuel Green, who gave the .50 caliber room to breathe.